Can I appeal a mediated settlement agreement if I later disagree with it? If you're wondering whether you can appeal a mediated settlement agreement if you later change your mind, let's break down the process and the rules involved. First, it's important to understand that a mediated settlement agreement is typically a voluntary agreement reached between parties with the help of a mediator. Once you agree to the terms and sign the settlement, it becomes a binding contract. However, the enforceability of this agreement can be tricky. If you reach a settlement during mediation but later disagree with it, the key issue is whether the agreement was properly documented and agreed upon by all parties. For instance, if the final settlement agreement was not fully drafted and signed during the mediation, disputes can arise later on. It's crucial to have a detailed and final settlement agreement and release signed by all parties before leaving the mediation session to avoid any misunderstandings or disputes. If a dispute arises after mediation but before the final agreement is signed, it can be challenging to enforce the settlement. Courts often require that there was a mutual agreement on the essential terms of the settlement. If there is no clear agreement, the court may not enforce the settlement. In terms of appealing the settlement itself, the process is not straightforward. You cannot simply appeal the settlement agreement as you would a court decision. Instead, if you feel that the settlement was not fair or if there were issues during the mediation process, you might need to go back to the court that oversaw the mediation. However, this is usually only possible if there were procedural errors or if the agreement was not properly formed. For example, in some jurisdictions, if the parties agree to mediate an appeal, the appeal process is paused while mediation takes place. If the mediation does not result in a settlement, the appeal proceeds. However, the settlement agreement itself is not subject to appeal in the same way a court decision would be. To ensure that your mediated settlement is enforceable and to avoid potential disputes, it's best to have a complete and detailed agreement signed by all parties during the mediation session. This way, you can avoid the hassle and additional costs of resolving disputes later on. In summary, while you can't appeal a mediated settlement agreement in the traditional sense, ensuring that the agreement is properly documented and agreed upon during the mediation can prevent many issues down the line. If disputes do arise, they are typically resolved through further negotiation or by going back to the court, but not through an appeal process.